This episode of the Crossroads podcast is brought to you by D&H Hair Care. D&H Hair Care is a 100% plant-based hair care line for all of your hair needs. I've personally become a huge fan of not only the pH Balance Conditioner, but the High Shine Glossifier hair oil. Everyone's personal favorite is the Renew hair oil. That's one of the best sellers in D&H Hair Care's repertoire. And if you would like to have your hair woes ended with the magic that is Danielle and her products, then I suggest that you go over to Holmes Wholesale and use the code CRP10 to get yourself 10% off of your order. That's right. You need to go to Holmes Wholesale, use the code CRP10, and get yourself 10% off of all products. Donnie has the answers for your hair needs. Now let's start the show. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Crossroads. I'm your host, Rashida Green, and this is the show for and about environmental justice and those who fight the fight with skin as melanated as the days are long. Knowledge is power, and we're breaking down stereotypes one episode at a time. So, on this episode, we are going to be talking about climate change. That's just it. That's the tweet. Climate change. In part because, President Biden has been talking a lot about his infrastructure plan. And a lot of that has to do with incorporating some aspects of environmental justice and righting some racial wrongs, at least in theory. I did review the fact sheet. I'm going to take some time to go through the entire plan and kind of see what it's giving. So expect to hear more about that in subsequent episodes. But before we get there, we are going to give some flowers. And I have a particular person that I would like to give some flowers to today. And that person is the new administrator of the EPA, Michael Reagan. Now, Michael is the first Black man to be the administrator of the EPA, of the Environmental Protection Agency. This is actually a pretty sizable deal. You know as well as I that I give the EPA a fairly hard way to go, especially with their relationship to environmental justice and some of the many ways that they have 100% dropped the ball. Okay. So I'm celebrating and giving this man some flowers. He is a North Carolina A&T graduate. He was working for the North Carolina Environmental Quality Division. He was formerly working for the Clinton administration in the EPA, and now he is the administrator. So kind of like full circle. So giving some flowers to him. The EPA, I'm not going to give them too much of a hard time today. They did actually have a really good, they were doing a really great racial justice, environmental justice series. And one of their talks was held today, which is Tuesday. And it was really good. And hopefully they'll post it on their website. But it was a couple of guys talking about redlining and that link to climate change. And I will definitely, once I go through my notes, of course, I will definitely, again, be talking about it on the show. Because this is just the taste. All right. Climate change. So before we get to some of the backgrounds of what climate change is, because it's what you should know as we're even beginning to set up and start this conversation, is that we've known about climate change for a long ass time. This is not new. This is not something that, the Free Willy children have just started. All the kids born in the 90s. That's not when it started. Did not start with Fern Gully or, white folk laying down in front of tanks. We've known about climate change for 100 years. Here's how I know that. In 1896, a Swedish scientist by the name of Svante Arrhenius, was the first person to identify that burning fossil fuels would increase and make changes to the climate. Fast forwarding, in 1976, Stephen Schneider, a former professor of environmental biology at Stanford, discussed global warming, the concept of global warming. This is 1976, and also served as a consultant for several US presidents. So let's stop before I go a step further. So 1896, this whole time is the point. During this whole time, we knew that fossil fuels were going to get us in the end. And here we all are. So let's continue. So the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, or the IPCC, met for the first time in 1988. That's important. Put a pin in that. We also, just in talking generally about climate change, we also have the Kyoto Protocol, which required countries to reduce their man-made or anthropogenic gases, which are like nitrous gas and hydrofluorocarbons. It was a requirement as part of that protocol. So why am I talking about all that? Or why do I bring that history up? Because as I mentioned, President Biden, has released his infrastructure plan. And I'm going to be skimming through the fact sheet, which is available on whitehouse.gov. I'm sure that was a website that for a few years you were probably afraid to go look at. I know I was. But here's just some of the things that this plan is proposing to do. So it is calling for a massive revitalization and update of highways, bridges, and just overall infrastructure. So the plan would modernize, this is directly from the website, 20,000 miles of highways, roads, and main streets, right? And repair 10,000 bridges and community linkages. So bridges and byways, highways, etc. He also wants to, as part of this plan, deliver clean drinking water, a renewed electric grid, and high-speed broadband to everybody. And he makes it a point in this particular call out to note that a large portion of rural Americans do not have access to high-speed internet, but also noting that the issue that we have with our drinking water and where our drinking water comes from in the piping needs to be replaced. So there are still lead pipes, as we all know. We discussed this briefly in the last episode. And if you didn't know that we still have lead pipes, surprise, boo, we still are using 100%. Some places are still using lead pipes, right? So part of Joe Biden's plan wants to do away with that. Also wants to modernize, hospitals and federal buildings, which, my goodness, if any of you have been in the sadness that is old federal buildings, my word. And he wants to use this to help to create jobs, the wages, all the jazz, which I do think as part, and this is called the American Jobs Plan. And I think in my personal opinion, what Joe Biden would like to do is kind of have a Roosevelt-like zhuzh to the economy. And what is being pitched is that we need to revitalize and create American jobs for improving the infrastructure, which is accurate. But the concern is, and he does have some call outs for specific things that will be done to hopefully address some of the inequities. But again, I'm going to take a deeper dive. But that's the purpose of me starting this episode and having this talk about climate, because we're starting to see, what this presidency is planning, or at least what they're talking about trying to do to right the wrongs. So we'll see. Put an even bigger pin in that. Now, climate change. Now, what is it? What the hell is it? I say it, you hear the terms, you hear climate change. What the hell does that mean? So when we talk about climate, we're really in climate change. We are talking about atmospheric problems. That this is all related to the atmosphere. And the issue of climate change is brought on by the warming. So how or why is this warming occurring? So there's three different areas or issues that contribute to climate change. The first one is acid deposition, basically acid rain. And this is caused by sulfur dioxide or nitrogen oxide emissions from industrial power plants. And they have a more localized impact, but it has a negative impact on humans, on wetlands, on soil, everything. And it also contributes to climate change. Next, we have ozone depletion. Now, if you all are, depending on how old you are, you remember when the talk of the massive ass hole in the ozone layer, and oh my God, when I was a kid, I just imagined it like a bald spot, and I'm like, oh my goodness, we got a giant bald spot on our planet, right? So in essence, there's a decreased amount of ozone in the atmosphere, and that's caused by ozone depletion, and the decreased amount of it in the ozone layer is caused by chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, and other ozone depleting substances. And the reason that this is a problem is that the ozone layer protects us from harmful ultraviolet rays from directly coming in from the sun. So we need to have the ozone in order for our own protection. And when we think about chlorofluorocarbons, a lot of aerosol cans used to have them. And I think there was I remember when I was growing up, again, totally dating myself, that there was a massive push to ban CFCs from aerosol cans because it was contributing to ozone depletion. But that is just one of the many ways that CFCs get into the atmosphere. And last, but certainly not least, is the mother of the house of it's getting hot in here herself, greenhouse gas effect, which in essence is climate change, right? The greenhouse gas effect. It's the increased amount of carbon dioxide, methane, and CFCs, as we talked about, in the atmosphere. This, like ozone depletion, is a global problem, and we can see the ramifications of that and most notably in how damn hot it is. And, according to Naomi Klein, who's a very, very popular, very prominent author and climate change advocate and activist, in her essay on fire, which not surprisingly is also included in the All We Can Save collection of essays, she noted that since the IPCC met in 1988, that carbon dioxide emissions have increased. She goes on to say that every aspect of our economy would have to change to correct the course that we're on. And she's not wrong. I've talked about waste to energy and how at this point, how little of an impact it makes on actually producing energy, but that companies will go to great lengths to try to prove that that's not the case, that what they're doing is so essential to business. I've also talked about how in the Maryland General Assembly right now, there's a bill to remove incinerator ash from the recyclable materials list because it is in fact not recyclable. But, and that's going to come up again too, of just in this conversation about these corporations and really how we're going to have to hold them absolutely 100% accountable. And I've talked about this before, and I'm actually going to bring up another essay that I really enjoyed that I've referenced before. And if you go back and listen to the Hills Have Eyes episode, I talked about the essay from Lorena Russell, which is part of the Philosophy of Horror collection of essays, where she talks about state-sponsored violence. And I'm going to take this a piece further. Just come with me on this journey. In her essay, she incorporates the theologist Louis Althusser. I've probably butchered that. It's Althusser. And he has some expanded definitions of what are classified as repressive state apparatus and ideological state apparatus. So let's break this down. Ideological state apparatus are basically like the social aspects of your life. So your family, your church, if that's what you do, your school, these are all areas of our social life. And this, according to this definition, acts as an extension of the repressive state. Now, the repressive state, their apparatus is violence, period. And you can see that through the police and the armed forces who are responsible for maintaining the social order right now and also for the state's interests in the future. And Althusser goes on to say that these forces are to maintain the status of the ruling class. I mean, and clearly, with everything that's going on right now from George Floyd and onward, you can see how that's true. But also, let's talk about this from the frame of climate change. We can talk about this and climate change and what we as individuals can do. And I fully plan to do that in this chat of ours. But we also have to be able to talk about the corporations as well and holding them accountable. So let's talk about our workplaces. Just making this up. Think about your workplace. Even if you haven't been in there in so long. And maybe you're in your workplace every day. But think about the ways you as an individual or your coworkers contribute to waste every day. Think about it. Your coffee. Are you bringing it from home? Or are you making it there? Do you throw the cup away? Is there a stir that you're using? It's plastic? Oh, and you throw it in the garbage? You throw it in the garbage? These things happen every day, all the time. Think about, if you are drinking bottles of water, if you drink bottles of water, even if you're in your house, think about how many bottles of water you go through in a day and you put that in the garbage. Every piece of plastic that you've ever used in your life still exists. All of us. But the bigger problem, as we've talked about on the show several times, and what we're going to keep on doing, I'm going to keep hammering it home, is this is not just our individual responsibility. Because we're not making plastic, right? The last time I looked, I don't have like a mini plastic making factory on my balcony. So I'm obviously not the one. I'm getting it from somewhere, right? We're getting it from somewhere. And then go a step further. Think about your home. What are some things that you could possibly reuse instead of throwing it away? And also, but before you get too deep and I think I'm stepping on your toes, think about some of the things that you may not have. Like, for example, we know that food waste is a major contributor to climate change. Do you have a composting service that you know of? Is it offered by your county or your city? I know that I don't. I know that we have a compost service that I can pay for and have someone come and pick up my compost. But that's it. Also, let's ask another question. How far are you away from the nearest landfill? Do you know where the nearest landfill is? How far away is it from you? And the point and the reason that I'm asking these questions is not just to talk about what we can do as individuals, but that there's a bigger picture here. And the bigger picture is that we as individuals are not going into these areas, these communities, which are often, no surprises, near landfills, are black or brown or poor communities. We're not the ones selecting them. So the selection is coming from someplace else. And thus, these are the people that we need to go to for the answers. And so we've come into the crossroads. We've talked about the three methods or the three ways that contribute to climate change. We didn't really talk so much about what happens as a result, but we kind of know, I think at this point at least, that we can see what is happening as a result of the planet warming, right? Longer, hotter summers, more extreme weather, more extreme bouts of rain, of hurricanes. I mean, we do remember last summer where we ran out of named storms and had to go to the Greek alphabet, right? So things are getting more intense. This is all a result of climate change. So when we're talking about our carbon footprint, that is the amount of greenhouse gases that are generated by our actions. So that's what it takes to go to work. If you're driving versus taking public transportation, eating and how much you eat, what you're throwing away, are you recycling it, blah, 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 the lights that are going on in your house, whatever, all of those things. And there are plenty of ways that we as individuals can reduce our carbon footprints. And I said I was going to give you some pointers, and here we go. So for example, easy effing peasy, man. You can use those reusable bags at the grocery store. You can use them when you go to the mall. You can use them whenever you need to. You could just use it as an extra bag to put tissues in, whatever. You don't have to use a plastic bag, right? Also, you could eat less meat. Y'all know I'm a baby vegan out here in these streets, and I try to keep my veganism to a minimum because I know it is, it's controversial. But what I will say is you can eat less meat. You can make a choice to eat less meat on occasion. You just buy a little less, buy a little more vegetable, buy a little more potato, and mix it up. Because animals produce a lot of methane. And we talked about mother methane, haven't we? And how she just contributes to her overall mother greenhouse gas effect and contributes to climate change because of the excess carbon in the atmosphere. But at the same time, you can do these things. You can use the bags. You can eat less meat. You can look for a ride share. You can, use public transportation more. You can purchase things that you can reuse. Like for a shout out to Fulfillery, who provides a filling station for you to fill up your vinegar, your cleaning supplies, your shampoo. They sell metal straws, all the things that you can use. A store like Fulfillery can provide it. But we also have to demand that our government and these corporations that we work for and purchase goods and services from are also doing their part deliberately, intentionally, to reduce the amount of carbon that we have in the atmosphere. When I talk about state-sponsored violence, I'm not only talking about the enforcement of the law by the police and the judicial system in the US. I'm also talking about corporations that intentionally select certain communities to put their facilities in without a regard for the impact. On the last episode, like I said, I talked about this bill that removes incinerator ash from the Maryland Recycling Act as a material that can be recycled. And think about how long companies have been able to capitalize on these loopholes that are really doing a disservice to the community. I haven't even talked about it yet, but I don't know if y'all saw, but in Florida, they had to evacuate a certain portion of it because some of the wastewater, there was flooding. And we've talked about the wastewater ponds and the coal ash ponds that are supposed to act as reservoirs for the byproducts that come from industrial plants. But we also have talked about the fact that they can leak. And we've also talked about the fact that there can be flooding that can cause the water to leak into or get into our drinking supply, however that, or into the watershed. So, it's just the gift that keeps on giving. And going back to what we can do as individuals, it is our responsibility to govern ourselves, but it's also to work and be accountable in our community, our immediate community, and also those who want to seek access to it. And as a planet, all of us, we have to work to reduce our carbon footprint. Going back to Naomi Klein's essay, the IPCC has designated the year 2030 as the point by which we should cut our emissions by half, right? The year 2030, just 9 years. And then we would be able to get to net zero carbon by the year 2050. And the overall fear that everyone is so worried about and why everyone's talking about 2030 and 2050 is because there is fear, as the IPCC noted, that the global temperature, if it rises 2 degrees Celsius, there will be a massive, catastrophic loss of life. And with greenhouse gas, which is in essence excess carbon in the atmosphere, the planet is continuing to warm. And so that's the major fear that everyone has. So I'm saying this, and yes, you do have to have accountability, individual accountability for what you do, but this is a massive global problem. And the real reason that people are hesitant about changing and wanting to do things is money. This plan that Joe Biden has is no cheap date. Not at all. Oh no. This is a horse and carriage type of date. This is a big ticket item. So, and unfortunately, this is the excuse that we hear from corporations too. Oh, it's expensive. Oh, it would take us time. Oh, we will need to have extra time. But in any event, it is all of our responsibility as a collective to combat climate change. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this episode. I hope you all enjoyed the information. Again, this is going to be a series of several conversations to be had about climate change and also what we can do as individuals. Also, what we need to be pushing for and why it's important. And I'm saying this to everyone because I'm very fortunate. The Crossroads podcast is very fortunate because we are international and we span a fairly sizable demographic in terms of age, which is really great. And that was all I wanted, just to make sure that this was getting out to everybody and that anybody could listen to this, pick it up, understand it, digest the information, be better for it. Thank you all for joining me for this episode. I hope you all enjoyed it. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, Crossroads Podcast. You can also join my Patreon, patreon.com/Crossroads Podcast, or visit my website, allroadscross.com. Thank you, and I will see you again at the Crossroads.